So last but not least, to conclude our session, I'm very happy to welcome here Major Geoffrey DEWEESE. Geoffrey is also part of the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General Corps at the Strategic Command in Nebraska, and he's going to talk about self-defense and, more importantly, anticipatory self-defense. And I'm sure that you'll have a lot of questions. So please, Geoffrey, the floor is yours.
Okay. First of all, I apologize. I have a cold, and I'm still going through jet lag. So good morning, good afternoon, whatever it might be. Thank you. So this is my opinion. These aren't the opinions of U.S. Strategic Command or the DoD or the Army. And of course, if there's any mistakes, they're obviously all my mistakes as well. So just with that caveat, let's get going. Applies to Paul as well. All my mistakes are his, apparently. So, cyber threat, the landscape. We have heard a lot about potential threats. And a lot of people talk about the cyber 9/11, the cyber Pearl Harbor, including former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, who talked about the danger of a cyber Pearl Harbor. We've also heard about the threats and how fast they can occur. And this is the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dempsey, talking about how cyber threats can occur at network speed, practically the speed of light. So the threats in cyberspace could both be really immense and they could be really fast. So within that threat landscape, how are we going to deal with these kind of threats? Well, the U.S. view has stated in our international strategy for cyberspace that we're going to respond to hostile acts in cyberspace as we would do to any other act. And any other threat to our country. So a hostile act in cyberspace is going to be treated just like any other hostile act. An incoming missile, a fleet sailing towards our shores, submarines, whatever it might be. And as we've heard again before, Harold Koh, who used to be the legal advisor of the State Department, specifically talked about self-defense under Article 51 applies to both armed attacks or imminent threats thereof. So what's an imminent threat thereof, and what is this framework we're looking at? Well, we know that Article 2.4 says you will not use force. Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. That's prohibitive. Article 51 is permissive. It says that there is an inherent right to self-defense. But what is that inherent right? What does that mean? The inherent right from the U.S. view is that we don't need to absorb that first blow. It's that we can defend before the attack comes. We don't have to wait till the bombs are dropping. These are anticipatory actions. A lot of people look to the Caroline standard that Daniel Webster talked about nearly 200 years ago from where he said that necessity of self-defense would have to be instant, overwhelming, no choice of means, no moment for deliberation. Over the years, this concept of imminence and preparatory actions has been expanded, and there's now a wide breadth of how you look at this range. Michael Walzer talked about Webster's reflex as being on one end, this instantaneous action. You don't even have time to deliberate, you have to act. On the other end, we've heard about preventive self-defense, where you don't even have an action. It's just something that might be in a distant danger. So looking at that, we have four basic concepts of self-defense that you can find in the literature. There's interceptive, there's anticipatory, preemptive, and finally preventive. But there's no legal definition. You're not going to go and find a treaty that's going to say what each of these things are. I would agree with this definition here. It's confounding what these definitions mean, because depending on who you read, it's going to mean different things. So they're generalized concepts at best, and we're going to try to talk about what some of these mean so you get a little bit of a background. So interceptive. Interceptive self-defense comes from a strict reading of Article 51. So interceptive then means that before the blow is landed, you can stop, but the blow is already underway. Think of a boxer. And a boxer's cocking his arm back, ready to strike you, all right? You don't have to wait till he hits you in the face. You can stop it because the blow is underway. And the example that was used here is the Japanese fleet. It leaves Japan, it's en route to Pearl Harbor. You don't have to wait till it gets to Pearl Harbor, till the Zeros have taken off and they're dropping bombs on our fleet in Pearl Harbor. As soon as it takes off, that's when the Article 51 right, according to this view, takes effect. Training, wargaming, advanced preparations, though, don't cross that red line. Those don't qualify. So this is a pretty restrictive view of self-defense. Anticipatory and preemptive self-defense, on the other hand, are a little more confusing. The Law of Armed Conflict desk book that the U.S. Army has treats preemptive self-defense as a subset of anticipatory self-defense. A lot of people look to the so-called Bush Doctrine from 2002 as a definition of what preemptive self-defense is. But if you look at this quote here, it's interesting. You have the greater the threat, the greater risk of inaction, the more compelling the case for taking anticipatory actions. So even the Bush Doctrine that supposedly talks about preemptive self-defense talks about anticipatory actions. So these words are kind of shared and boundied about. Some people have said they're even synonymous. There's no difference really between preemptive and anticipatory action. Others have said, no, anticipatory means you have a palpable and imminent threat. You can actually see what it is. Versus preemptive, it's a possibility among a range of other possibilities, a contingency. So when you look at the definitions between these two, there's a wide variety of discussions and viewpoints on what they mean. Now, then there's preventive self-defense. Most scholars would agree that it is not under Article 51, that it is not lawful under international law. Preventive self-defense is a possible attack, some indeterminate point in the future. You don't know when it's going to happen, but you want to take care of it now. Michael Walzer said it's really about balancing power. So let's take for the moment that preventive self-defense is verboten. It's not okay. Interceptive self-defense, on the other hand, that's Article 51. That's a stricter reading of Article 51. So I'm going to focus more on preemptive or anticipatory self-defense, and you can choose for yourself where you want to draw that line, frankly. Self-defense has a couple of prerequisites under international law, and these are the first two. These apply to any kind of self-defense, whether it's anticipatory or not. First of all, the necessity prerequisite, that the force that you use, it has to be such that it is needed to successfully repel an imminent armed attack or defeat one that's underway. And it's judged from the victim state's perspective. It has to be a reasonableness standard. And this is from the Talon Manual, which gives a good overview. Good job. Good overview of this concept. And then proportionality, once you have the necessity to defend, then you have to look at what you're going to do. Proportionality goes to your responsive actions. So you already have to have established necessity, and then proportionality says what is the degree of action you can take in response. What I think is more important within this discussion, though, is the concept of imminence. Imminence only applies to preemptive or anticipatory actions. It's not going to apply to a strict Article 51 standard because in that case, the attack has already happened, and you're defending yourself against an attack that's already happened. Imminence says it's about to happen. But what is imminence? What is imminence within this cyber concept? First of all, Professor Schmidt here has said that you can't really look at Daniel Webster's definition anymore. Excuse me. What that might have made sense back in the 19th century with Daniel Webster, well, warfare has evolved dramatically. So we do have that broad range from the Webster's reflective action to the Bush Doctrine. And the Talon Manual says that imminence is met when an adversary is clearly committed to launching an armed attack, and the victim state will lose the opportunity to effectively defend itself unless it acts. In other words, it may act anticipatorily only during that last window of opportunity. And I think that's the real key there, that last window of opportunity. So now we've taken Daniel Webster's immediacy, no room for deliberation, and we have some room for deliberation. We have to deliberate on what that last window of opportunity really means within self-defense. So the window, it can present itself immediately before the attack or sometime long before the attack occurs. In other words, it doesn't have to be a matter of hours or even days. The window of opportunity deals not with the temporal proximity of the attack, but what is the last chance that you have to actually respond effectively and make sure that you have stopped the attack that will come. You have to know that the attack will come. You have to have a reasonable belief in it. It's a relative determination, and it's really going to be determined by policymakers, not by lawyers like myself. a policymaker is going to be looking at this. And if you're the president of the United States or the president of some other country, you have to decide, what is the threat? What is the intelligence I'm being given? What do I know about what's happening? And when can I act? What's the last moment that I can act? Let's back up a little bit and talk about cyber operations in general. 2 articles here in previous CyCons have described what a cyber operation could be. First of all, we have a concept called cyber key terrain. So cyber key terrain in this view was defined as trying to figure out an attacker. Notice an attacker, this is an offensive action. You're going into some other network. This is outside your own network. You're looking for avenues of approach, observation points, fields of fire that can provide the attacker with a complete view of his or her options at each stage of the attack. So that's trying to find cyber key terrain. So if you're looking at this within cyberspace, you're then applying the concepts that a lot of ground commanders, I'm a soldier, not a naval officer, so I'll look at a soldier that's sending in a brigade of tanks. What's the key terrain? Do they need to go around a hill, over a hill? Is there a bridge? Is there a town on the way? You're still looking for this key terrain within cyberspace as well. And it's a maneuver. You have to maneuver within cyberspace to find the locations where you can capture, destroy, disrupt, deny, degrade, manipulate your adversary's cyberspace. So if you look at these definitions, what does that mean if you're on the receiving end of one of these? If an adversary is maneuvering into your cyberspace, an adversary is seizing key terrain within your cyberspace, and they do this well before there might be an actual attack going on, an actual war going on, what does that mean? How are you going to interpret that? Specifically, given the speed of cyber, and given these concepts of what could be cyber operations, what does imminence mean anymore? 2 examples from the Talon manual I think were useful. And they talked about logic bombs versus remotely activated malware. So a logic bomb. So you get into an adversary system and you implant some logic bomb, some code, a bunch of ones and zeros, that upon a certain determination of some action in the future, it's going to turn off that computer. It's going to fry that system. Whatever action is going to be taken, it's already preset in that computer, in your adversary's system. Versus remotely activated malware. Remotely activated means that you have also gotten into a system, and it's going to give you a capability to attack in the future. But according to the Talon manual, the criterion of imminence isn't met until the attacker decides to attack. Well, if you're the attacker, that's easy, because you're going to be the one deciding. What if you are the victim in this kind of a case? You don't know what the criteria is anymore. And the Talon manual does admit that distinction is going to be hard to make in practice. If you find malware in your system, and it's a critical system, that's going to be kind of alarming to you if you're the victim state. And the victim state's determination of what they're going to do is going to be based off a reasonableness standard. That's the reasonableness of the commander, the reasonableness of the president, the policymakers, the decision makers who are going to decide. They're going to get the facts that come in. They're going to be told, here's what's happening, here's what we've discovered, and they're going to have to decide what's going on. So from my perspective, this is one thing that I would disagree with in the Talon manual. I think that when you have malware in your system, it does give a rise to a determination. Whether it's a logic bomb or remotely activated malware, you might have an imminence situation. So in my paper, I went through and I tried to apply these cases to a hypothetical, because lawyers love hypotheticals, don't we? And I used as an example, there's speculation that Israel had gotten into Syria's air defense systems before they bombed a facility in Syria a number of years ago. Somehow turned off those air defenses so they weren't working, so that when they flew over Syrian airspace, the air defense systems didn't activate, and they were able to successfully complete their attack. So using that kind of as a background, so you have Brownland, and some cyber defender in Brownland finds this malicious code in their system. They start investigating this code. So they're doing internal defensive measures right now. And when they look at this more closely, maybe they can see some signatures, maybe they have some other intelligence that starts to tell them, this code comes from our adversary's gray land, and this code might be in our air defense system or some other vital system to our national defense. We know that gray land doesn't like us, and we're concerned that this might be something that they're going to do so that at any moment they can activate this malware and attack us. So in that case, it's an air defense system, and you feel like there's a concern, you have necessity, and then you look at imminence. We don't know, if you're gray land, when this attack is going to come. So what is imminence? You don't have any certainty anymore. But you know that it could be some guy sitting in gray land with their finger above that button. All they have to do is press enter, and at the speed of cyber, the attack has commenced, your defense systems are down, and then all the adversary needs to do is launch some missiles, launch some aircraft, and then they can commence with the rest of their attack. So the question is, does that qualify as imminence? Does that give rise to gray land to exercise preemptive actions, maybe launching their own missiles ahead of time, maybe using a cyber mechanism, whatever defensive action they take? Does this create an imminence standard that they can respond to? And from my perspective, it might. So, in conclusion, I think that when we're looking at anticipatory actions in cyberspace and preemptive actions in cyberspace, we can agree, generally speaking, that the existing norms of international law apply and that those concepts are included. But putting a measure on determining the imminence standard in cyberspace is challenging. And states aren't going to be able to apply the same standards that they might use for a conventional attack, which could occur much more slowly and over time. They're not going to have the same advanced warning that the ships have left Pearl Harbor, if indeed they are able to even get that kind of warning within cyberspace. Cyber operations, therefore, in an adversary's network, as described by those other articles, determining key cyber terrain or cyber maneuver, could, if detected, cause that adversary, the victim state, to reasonably believe that an attack is imminent. And given that, it's important for both sides of this discussion, both states in this example, to carefully consider what kind of actions they're going to do in cyberspace. Because let's say Brown Land wasn't going to attack. They just wanted to be careful so that if they needed to, they could take out their adversary's air defense system if Grayland attacked them first. But inadvertently, they gave Grayland a reasonable basis to say the attack is imminent. Now Grayland attacks them. So you got to be careful. In cyberspace, we all live in glass houses, I believe. And you have to be careful that what standards we apply as state A, whether it's the United States or any other state, apply that to your adversaries or potential adversaries and see how they're gonna work behind. So that's my presentation, and I will open it up for any questions.
I'm sure that there are a lot of questions here. Can you hand the mic for the gentleman here?
Thanks. Great presentation. Greg Austin from the East-West Institute. Make a brave comment and then have a question. While I agree that anticipatory or preemptive self-defense is a very good state policy, I don't agree that it's represented as a norm in international law, so that's my comment. The question would be, how would you apply your scenario to the case of Russian views of United States activities, bearing in mind that the Russian government in the last year declared that the US doctrine of global strike, cyber-enabled global strike, is the only threat to Russian national security?
Well,
only major threat at the strategic level to Russian national security.
Yes. I think we can agree that there's a lot of different views about preemptive or anticipatory self-defense. Recognizing that there's different views, you have to recognize that the state that you're looking at might have a view contrary to yours. So from a legal advisor's standpoint, I can make a good faith argument that international law does support that. I believe you can make a good faith argument against that, and many well-known scholars have made that case. In terms of your follow-on question, I think that just having a threat out there, I mean, we in the United States have a wealth of military capabilities at our disposal. The fact that you have a capability doesn't mean that you're going to use it. So the bigger concern is, if you're Russia, if I put on my Russian hat, and I find that the United States has infiltrated all of my missile defense early warning systems, that might be a cause of concern. And if I'm the United States, I have to be thinking about that if I'm going to try to infiltrate Russian early missile defense warning systems. I'm not saying that we do. Remember that caveat, this is all hypothetical. But to your question, I think you have to look at it from both ends. And whether you're on one side or the other, consider carefully your actions.
You're going to make me stand. I'm Bill Whitman with the Air Force Research Lab. I'm also Army Reserve JAG.
Outstanding.
You mentioned two things in here that I think I'm going to kind of challenge you on. For one, that the necessity, proportionality, and response are viewed in terms, from the Talon Manual, of the victim state. That was on at least one of the slides. But with the recent Wales summit applying Article 5 collective self-defense to NATO countries, wouldn't that vitiate the perspective of the harm to a state? So say a small NATO state who is attacked by a cyber weapon, a larger NATO state using the right to collective self-defense of that smaller state could utilize a vast array of other things. So the necessity is not in the victim state, it's in the NATO state exercising the self-defense.
So I think that one of the things we heard this morning is that we don't know for sure how this Article 5 collective self-defense assessment would work because it hasn't happened yet. The perspective I shared here is from one state to another. So the reasonableness standard would apply if state A was looking at it and trying to make their reasonableness determination. Now, state A was aligned with state B and C and D, and they wanted to go to states B, C, and D and say, we think there's a danger here, we want to vote collective self-defense. I think it would be reasonable to say that everybody would have to agree to that reasonableness before they would all raise their hands and sign up for the collective self-defense. So if state A can't make their case, they might still believe they have a reasonable basis for self-defense, but they might lose the opportunity to have that collective self-defense with their allies because their allies might be a little more squeamish about that. If you're the victim state facing an imminent armed attack, or what you believe to be is an imminent armed attack, you might have a greater cause to claim reasonableness than if you're the other states that aren't themselves facing that challenge. And that might be something that would have to be happening during the political and policy determinations that would invoke an Article 5 type situation.
Are there any other questions? In the back. That will be the last question.
Good afternoon, Paul Duchesne, Netherlands Defense Academy. You've been concentrating on imminence. Fair enough, because that's the title of your on your chart of the chapter and the presentation.
Yes.
But by pointing at the scenario, you focused on imminence as well. Could you pay some tribute to the principle of necessity in responding to this threat or imminent attack, please?
Certainly. I focus on imminence because it strikes me that with cyber, we're looking at a completely different kind of imminence. Again, going back to that quote by General Dempsey, the network speed concept changes imminence. And I think when you look at how science and technology have evolved, imminence is new and different. The necessity standard probably remains the same with cyberspace as it would with any other potential attack. So you'd still have to determine that your self-defense is necessary to preserve something critical to your national self-defense, such as, in my example, to preserve your air defense systems. If you don't defend your air defense systems, then you open yourself up to a huge attack and you can't defend yourself. So the necessity aspect, I didn't focus on that because I don't think that changes as much within cyberspace operations. I do think imminence in cyberspace presents new and unique challenges, and we might have to adjust what is or is not imminent, and we might have to take consideration of that when we look at what may or may not be happening in cyberspace. Hope that answers your question.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Geoffrey. I think deserve a great round of applause.